Hey, good evening, boils and ghouls. Welcome to this week's episode of Halloweekly, where George and I interview Sarah L. Johnson. She is a best-selling writer whose short fiction has appeared in several journals and anthologies, including Room Magazine, Shock Totem, Crossed Genres Magazine, and the Bram Stoker Award-nominated Dark Visions 1, a collection of modern horror. We're going to be talking to her today about her book, Suicide Stitch. Enjoy.
Thank you so much for doing this. I love your book.
Oh, thank you. I always sound so surprised when people tell me they like my book. I'm like, what? Really?
Well, I would love just to get like a little bit of background for our listeners on what like a normal day in your life is like, and then kind of what, if anything, steered you or predisposed you to writing kind of darker themed literature.
Okay. Well, a day in my life is really boring. I'm not even sure I want to talk about it. I'll just put it
well, full disclosure, I read your bio and I do the social media for an event called Independent Bookstore Day. I'm obsessed with bookstores, so I wanted to just talk a little about your background. It's probably just for me.
Well, I do work in a bookstore, so like I'm this living cliche of the writer who is conventionally unemployable. It's pretty much everything I can do. We're always writers, I find we're always like sort of Frankensteining an income through various sources of bookstore.
That's an awesome phrase.
Yeah. So a day starts really early for me, too early. I've got 3 kids, so I have to get them up and chase them off to school. And if I'm working during the day, I go and do that, or otherwise I come home. Am I allowed to swear?
Yes.
Or is that not encouraged?
No, you're absolutely allowed to swear.
Okay, I just thought I'd ask because some people don't like it, and it would happen anyway.
No worries.
So, if I'm not working, I'll sort of just fuck around on the internet for a couple hours, all the while loathing myself and reminding myself that I'm supposed to be writing. And then I'll go for a run or do yoga and not write. And then I'll fuck around on the internet for another hour. And somewhere in there, I might get in a couple paragraphs. And then it's time to be mom again. So,
is running a separate activity for writing, or do you get ideas while you're running?
I don't really get ideas when I'm running. Running is like my time to be blissfully not thinking about anything, which is actually really good for writing because it forces you to step away and not think about what you're doing and what your problem is. And then when you come back to it, it's like having a fresh perspective, a different set of eyes.
That's awesome. I think I read something similar. Murakami had a book on running, right? I think.
Yeah. What I talk about when I talk about running, I love Murakami. Oh my God. I love him so much.
So do I. He's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good segue to the next question. Like, did you have inspirations that kind of led you into, I know you do more than a horror genre, but do you have inspirations that led you into the horror genre, or is it just an organic thing that springs from within?
I've always really loved reading horror. I mean, I read really broadly. I read everything, but I've always really loved horror. And when I sit down to write a story, I never think about what genre it's going to be, which leads to a lot of rejection because it doesn't quite fit with literary, doesn't quite fit with horror. It's somewhere in between. And I think, I don't know. I find sort of the darker stuff an interesting way of exploring who we are and exploring sort of the fears of everyday life, but magnified.
Mm-hmm. And so, but is there a specific influence on you, or does it not work like that?
Well, like author influence, or oh
or
yeah,
director or whatever
yeah. My favorite horror authors, Poppy Z. Bright. Yeah, like I want more, but he stopped writing horror, so now he writes about like food and stuff, which is okay, I guess. But those are,
I thought I saw something really, really small come from like almost like 2 paragraphs that
Yeah.
Poppy released, but that was the last thing I saw.
yeah, exactly. Gemma Files is another Canadian horror writer. She is amazing. Sarah Langan, Megan Abbott, Elizabeth Hand, Mark Z. Danielewski. If you can get through him, it's worth it.
That's funny. We just had that on the Halloweekly Facebook page.
Yeah.
House of Leaves was
How
one
many
of the
people? How many people do you think have actually read that book all the way through?
4.
Yeah, like I did, but it was worth it. It's really, I haven't even figured it all out yet, but wow.
Yeah, I actually found that book through his sister because I
Yeah.
was a fan of her music, and then I
Oh.
tried it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I tried a couple times, and there was just I've not succeeded.
Yeah, I found it legitimately scary. Like any book, it starts with an otherwise blank page saying, "This is not for you."
Right.
Let's go.
So your collection, Suicide Stitch, is, I mean, there's a lot of variety in the collection, and it feels like there's specific reasons why some of the stories go the way they do. Like the inspiration behind a couple of stories, if you could just talk through the Thank You for Playing is a really interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's got to be something behind why that story went the way it did.
There is a story behind that story. So here in Calgary, there is a nonprofit organization called Find It in the oldest neighborhood in Calgary, which is Inglewood and Ramsey. And this organization does like pop-up art installations, night markets, all these cool little things. And then they partnered with Calgary Reads and an event called Reading Town, which is a week it's like a reading festival. And they wanted a story that could be broken up into parts to correspond with a walking tour of the community. So they asked me if I'd write it. So I did. And so the idea was each part of the story is they had it like on big sort of posters at these spots on a walking tour of the community. So you'd get a bit of the story with each stop. So what you're reading about is where you are in the community.
Cool. And did they expect to get something sinister?
I don't think they got it, is the thing. Because feedback, they're like, "Oh, that's so nice that story about caring about your community." Being duress.
I got a really like every breath you take feeling from that.
Right? But the idea of just like that, this has been going on for a long time, and it just gets passed on and on and on, and ultimately you benefit from it, but there's always this implicit threat. There's something sinister about it.
Yeah, so I mean, I honestly, with a twist or two to a detail here or there, I could see that being like a Black Mirror episode.
That is probably like the best compliment I've ever gotten. Wow, thank you.
Well, and that's the thing is, I was like, why is this creeping me out so much? And then I wanted to see why you took the story the way you did, but apparently they didn't catch it.
Well, and I was a little worried because I really did try to write something nice, and maybe funny, maybe uplifting, but it always just takes a hard left somewhere, and it is.
Actually, this is funny because this has come up a couple times with authors, but there's an example that pops into my head. I'm a huge fan of a band called Throwing Muses and a musician named Kristen Hirsch. And they started as, they thought they were going to be like a retro surf party band, but they create really dark, intense, like alternative genre music.
Scandinavian death metal.
Exactly. And the first time they played out, the whole band was like horrified at the audience's faces. And then they met up afterwards and they're like, I guess we're not a party band. Right.
Yeah.
The music writing just takes a turn, right? So
Yeah, I think you have an intention, and then it what you're creating takes on a life of its own.
sure, makes total
And your
sense.
intention,
Um,
yeah, your intention doesn't always hold.
what's is the first story you ever wrote in this collection, or are there stories that predate this book?
Well, yes, the first serious short story I ever wrote is in this collection, and it's a ballad for Wheezy Barnes, I think it's called. Set at the Calgary Stampede. Yeah, that was the first serious short story I ever wrote, and it was for a call for an anthology that never actually ended up coming together. But the theme was Stampede Noir.
Oh, weird.
And so I just had this idea of this kid who's in love with a much older woman, but has never had the courage or a good reason to approach her until certain things come together.
Oh, cool. You actually have had a lot of short stories published. How do you account for the fact that you had so many published in such a short time?
Tenacity. Things, like, oh, you have to have a really good idea to make it as a writer, or you have to be talented. It's like, no, you just have to stick with it and be as bullheaded as humanly possible. That's what leads to publishing.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything in your background that kind of predisposes you to write the kind of things that you write, or is it sort of separate from where you came from?
Definitely my background. I was raised in a devoutly religious household, Mormons, and the church and I have since parted ways. And I'm not a bitter person or anything. It's just not for me. Mm-hmm. But the fact remained that I had all this stuff in my head. And this, fair warning, like, if you raise your kids religious, be prepared for the possibility that they will become writers.
That's awesome.
Fortunately, my parents are very cool.
Uh-huh.
They're very okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see, a lot of people would just be like, how can you take this like loving, beautiful childhood we tried to give you and twist it into such dark, horrible stuff? But that's what happens. And I think I'm always sort of trying to explore, like, okay, what if some of this is actually real? What would it look like? So taking biblical knowledge or stories and sort of turning them around. So, like, the way it is in the Bible, I don't really buy that, but this maybe, this I could see.
That's awesome. What is the I read something somewhere about, I think it was Wes Craven, where they said he was really good at taking headlines or just snatches of phrase and turning them into stories. So, like, for Suicide Stitch, for example, did you create a story around that phrase, or did you have the story in your head and then titled it afterwards?
That story started with an image, and it was of a dressmaker's form. And they're scary, right? Like, it's the thing that's always in the attic in scary movies. Yeah. And, you think it's a ghost, and then the light comes on and it's a mannequin or something.
They are terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought, there's just something about like this limbless, headless female form that just creeped me out so bad. And I knew there was a story around it, and it ended up being a story about sisters. And my mom is a seamstress. She's very talented, makes some beautiful things. So I grew up with all those things around me, like fabric and bobbins and needles and, the smell of a hot sewing machine. I can recall those so vividly. And so it became a story about that and about family and about things that maybe on their own, there's nothing scary or sinister about them. But there is something there that just gives you like the creeps when you look at it, like the dressmaker's form.
Oh, for sure. Like even that scene in Silence of the Lambs where nothing's happening and you're just in the room with that. That man, it's just inherently creepy.
Yeah, exactly.
How long did it take you to write? How long does it take you to write a typical story?
3 years.
Sorry, didn't mean to laugh so genuinely.
That's okay. Everyone laughs. And you can probably tell this is not the first time I've explained it. It starts with, as I said, usually an image, and then I'll have an idea for a character, and I'll start writing, and I'll get a page or two, character, voice, setting, but I don't know what the story is. So it goes in a drawer for 2 years. And in that time, and I'll take it out every now and again and just read it, but I won't add anything to it. It'll just go back in the drawer. And then, about 2.5 years later, I'll pull it out and the story will be there. I'll know what it is and I'll write it and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it. So yeah, that is the 3-year process of writing a short story. And occasionally I've written them faster, but most of my have been 3-year efforts.
And that process, like, do you know that last time you reach in the drawer to pull it out, that's the time you're gonna finish it, or does it take you by surprise?
I definitely get a different feeling when I take it out to finish it. Even if I don't quite know what the story is, I just know it's coming. I know it's in there somewhere. Okay. And I start writing and it just comes out.
So, and now this really intrigues me. We've asked every author that's ever been on this same question because I find this super interesting. Like, do you intentionally add fright, a scary effect, or tone to the story, or does it just organically show up?
I think it's organic. As I said, like I never sit down thinking I'm going to write a scary story. I just think I have this story I need to write. And I don't know, like, I don't even know how people make things scary, like intentionally. I wouldn't even know how to do that. I think it just comes out. And if I feel scared when I'm writing it, I'm hoping that's how the reader will feel when they read it.
Ah, that makes sense. Because the last line of Suicide Stitch is terrifying.
Yeah.
Right? Aggressively terrifying. And I was just wondering, like, is that a purposeful note to end it on, or is it just that line had to be there because it's perfect?
I think like the story a lot of it was really written around that specific endpoint. Like I always knew that's where it was going. But it was a very hard story to write because I have a sister and we're very close. And when I tried to think, I don't think I'm spoiling anything. You know that the younger sister has passed away right at the beginning of the story. But,
yes.
And so when I tried to think of a world where I was alive and my sister wasn't, like my brain just would not go there. And that surprised me. But then I realized that's what's happening to the character. She just can't accept it. And that leads to that endpoint because she just can't accept.
That's interesting. Do you get scared while you're writing the stories?
That one I did get scared. The other one I got scared writing was Bridge. Mm-hmm. About a mother and her daughter. I think, I don't know, like real life things scare me. Like monsters, no, not really. Like even when I'm reading horror, if it's like, I can enjoy the story, like a good monster story, but it doesn't scare me. It's those real life things that scare me.
You didn't get scared writing 3 minutes? That's stunning to me. That story really rattled me.
Yeah, well, I do get like that feeling of like that fear of being in that situation. And I would even hold my breath, right? Like while I was writing it, trying to get that feeling, observe like what was going on in my body and what was going on in my mind when I was holding my breath.
Oh, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
can you get scared reading other people's works? Do you remember something that scared you from a book?
I'm a tough nut to crack. Like I really enjoy horror, but to be actually scared is pretty rare. Like House of Leaves had its moments where I was like, "Holy shit!" I had to put the book. Like, and it's not like the jump scare moments that you would think. It's the moment in that book, for instance, where they definitively determine that the length of the inside wall of the house is longer than the length of that same wall outside.
Sure.
And it's that moment, like I felt so chilled. Gemma Files writes horror stories that do scare me. Paul Tremblay's Head Full of Ghosts, I found quite frightening as well.
It's those quiet moments it's like people, right? It's like what they say about it's to watch out for the quiet ones. It's the quiet moments that usually just they drill down and really unsettle you. There's a book by a guy named Matt Ruff called Set This House in Order, and there's one of the characters is schizophrenic, and his control mechanism is to pretend the different personalities live in different rooms, and all the personalities get together and meet. And there's one personality, he's the architect, he built the rooms. And there's one personality who doesn't show up to the meeting. And the main personality turns to the architect and goes, "Where's this person?" And the architect responds, "Maybe he's in the basement." And the main personality is like, "We have a basement?" And it was so chill. Right?
I just got goosebumps you saying that.
It's those little moments you got to watch for, and you have a lot of them in your collection, which is really cool.
Thank you. Good. Yeah.
So you have what's next for you? I know we're 3 years away from the story you're working on at the moment. What's coming up from you next?
What I've got coming out in the next few months, my first novel. It's called Infractus, and it's like a grim, dark sci-fi fantasy. So that's coming out in a couple months. And after that, who knows?
Oh, and I know Nick wanted to ask about, good.
Oh, I'm really interested in writers' writing process. Is there any, like when you write, is there do you listen to music? Do you have like a TV show on, or are you complete silence?
I need quiet to write. I listen to music around writing, and it does put me in a certain mood. But when I'm writing, I do need quiet. Like I can't write in a coffee shop or with kids playing around me. I need that silence.
Is there, and I'm always curious with writers in different mediums. Is there a movie or TV show that helps inspire you when it comes to creating something new,
or scares you, since you're a tough?
Or scares you, yeah.
I love like the Coen brothers for character stuff. Like they've always just got like every single person in their movies is like you can tell they have their own backstory, their own life, they're so well developed and distinctive. I don't watch a lot. I always joke that I'm like 3 years behind on TV because we don't have cable and I would just watch Netflix or stream stuff off Apple TV. But so like a couple months ago, I was on Facebook. I'm like, "Hey, you guys, if you watch Dexter, it's so good."
That is awesome. You're gonna love The Sopranos. You'll have to get back to us. Let us know.
The ending of Dallas is gonna shock you.
Yeah.
Cool. Where do people find you, get your works, follow you on social media if that's possible?
I'm on Twitter at lead-lined-alias, which I thought was clever, but people are always like, "What? Dahlias? No."
That's great.
They can find me at my website, saraljohnson.com, and read my sporadic, inconsistent blogging.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I am on Facebook as well.
That's awesome. And I'll put all the links when we publish the episode. I really encourage people to read this collection. It is amazing. It's chilling.
It's much more interesting than I am. Much more interesting than I am.
Well, I don't know if you know what damage you've wrought here in this interview, but I'm now torn because I don't think there's anything more I would want than for my child to be a writer. But now I'm going to have to fake raise them religiously to turn them into a writer.
Oh, you sweetest things.
I gotta pick like a really restricted. Oh man, this is. I can't wait to blame you for this years later.
Yeah, the religion is when you get stories like "Heart Beating Still." That definitely came out of the religious upbringing for sure.
What about "I Am Lost"? Was that a?
That was my just stab at just attempting to do a Lost in the Woods kind of story. And then I started thinking of Lost sort of as its own sentient consciousness. It's not a state of being. It's actually a self-aware entity.
That's so interesting because that's one of the things like I noticed this makes me feel and sound old, but I remember being able to get lost, but being in Los Angeles, talking to someone who's like 20 years old, they have no idea what that even feels like because it's impossible.
Well, yeah.
Right.
And when you're because where I live, we're just sort of like at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. And when you go out there, like you forget how dark it is when there's no city lights around you. And it is terrifying. True darkness is scary.
Yeah, that's absolutely
because we just don't experience. We don't
well, yeah, I mean, I feel like I read somewhere that, in the old, when the forests were actually forests, like Middle Ages, you could walk for weeks and not see sun, basically, right? It's got to be the creepiest. Nick's shaking his head. He doesn't want to. Nick doesn't want to be thinking about this.
You were like, I remember being lost. I'm like, no, George, my phone's died too. I've been lost.
I don't know, man.
It's not the same, but I'll take it.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're good. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I love I love the work, and I'm looking forward to what you have coming up next. So, thanks for being on.
Thank you.